Sometimes, courtroom battles are fought with words, but others reveal cracks in the very foundation of justice itself. When an arrogant judge wields power unchecked, how long before the scales tip against him? Stay tuned to witness a case unlike any other unfold. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Maya Brooks's heels echoed against the cold marble floors of the Franklin County Courthouse. She wasn't nervous. She was furious. The kind of fury that tightened her jaw and made each step deliberate and precise. Another day, another trial, another innocent black man fighting for his life in a system designed to see him lose. Maya had stood in this exact position more times than she cared to count. But this time was different. This wasn't just another case. She wasn't just defending a client. She was preparing to stand against a judge who had already made up his mind. Judge Clayton Hargrove. His name alone made her blood run hot. The man had spent decades ensuring that men who looked like Jamal Green never got a fair chance. He was a relic of the Old South, wrapped in a black robe, seated on a bench he treated more like a throne than a place of justice. Maya had heard the stories about him long before she ever set foot in his courtroom. Tales of defense motions denied before they were even spoken, of public defenders who had given up trying, of young men whose lives were swallowed whole by sentences that didn't fit their crimes. Jamal sat beside her at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. A 24-year-old grocery store clerk accused of a crime he couldn't have committed, now staring down a judge who likely saw him as guilty the moment he walked into the courtroom. "You ready for this?" she asked quietly, leaning in. Jamal nodded, though his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "You believe me, right?" Maya didn't hesitate. "That's not even a question." The door behind the judge's bench creaked open, and silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Hargrove entered, his shoulders squared, his eyes scanning the room like a king surveying his domain. He was in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl etched into his face, the expression of someone who had long since stopped pretending to be fair. His black robes hung loosely from his frame as he took his seat. Maya didn't miss the way he glanced at her, his lip curling just slightly before he adjusted his microphone. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The courtroom stood, and Maya forced herself to keep her expression neutral. She played this game before. The trick was not letting men like Hargrove see how deeply their prejudice cut. "You may be seated," he said after a moment. The room settled. Across from her, the prosecutor, Daniel Morrow, had his papers neatly arranged on the table before him. His cheap suit was pressed just enough to look official. Maya had gone up against Morrow before. He wasn't a real threat here. He was just another cog in the machine, another overworked state attorney who barely cared what happened as long as he got a conviction. "This court is now in session," Hargrove began, his voice gravelly but steady. "We are here for the case of the state of Alabama versus Jamal Green, charged with armed robbery. Prosecution, are you ready to proceed?" Morrow stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Defense. Maya rose to her feet and met the judge's gaze without blinking. "Ready, Your Honor." "We'll see about that," Hargrove muttered, almost to himself. Maya clenched her fists beneath the table. She hadn't even spoken a word of defense, and already the judge was dismissing her. Morrow launched into his opening statement with mechanical efficiency. He painted Jamal as a desperate man who had turned to crime. He spoke of overwhelming evidence, surveillance footage, an eyewitness, and a confession Jamal had supposedly given. Maya kept her expression unreadable. Inside, her mind was already dissecting every lie, every inconsistency. When it was her turn to speak, she stood calmly, smoothing the front of her blazer. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and deliberate. "What you just heard is a story. A well-rehearsed, neatly packaged story designed to make you believe my client, Jamal Green, is guilty before you've even had a chance to examine the facts for yourselves." She paced slowly, ensuring she made eye contact with each juror. Justice isn't about stories. It's about truth. The prosecutor would try to convince them this case was open and shut, but the surveillance footage didn't clearly identify anyone. The eyewitness had only seen the suspect for a few seconds in poor lighting. And the so-called confession? It was a fabrication. The burden of proof is on the state, Maya concluded. And by the time this trial is over, you'll see just how little proof they actually have. Judge Hargrove's gaze bore down on her like a hammer ready to fall. She ignored it. Prosecution, call your first witness, Hargrove said. Officer Nathan Reed took the stand. Morrow guided him through his testimony. How Reed had received a call about an armed robbery at Hardy's corner store. How he had spotted Jamal 2 blocks away, matching the description of a black male in a gray hoodie and jeans. Maya's stomach churned. That description could apply to half the young black men in Birmingham. Did you find any weapons on Mr. Green when you stopped him? Morrow asked. No, sir. No further questions. Maya rose slowly. Officer Reed, you said my client matched the description. What was that description again? Reed shifted in his seat. Black male, late teens or early 20s. Gray hoodie and jeans. And how many black men in gray hoodies and jeans do you think were walking around that area that night? Objection, Morrow said. Speculation. Hargrove, wave him off. Answer the question. Reed hesitated. I don't know. Exactly, Maya said smoothly. You don't know. She turned to the jury. This case hinges on assumptions. And assumptions are not evidence. Reed looked uncomfortable as she took her seat. The next witness was Leonard Brady, the store owner. An older white man in a faded work uniform. Brady claimed he had seen Jamal enter his store that night and had pressed a silent alarm because he thought Jamal was reaching for a weapon. Did you actually see a weapon? Maya asked him on cross-examination. No, Brady admitted. You assumed he was a threat because he was black and wore a hoodie. Objection, Morrow snapped. Sustained, Hargrove said, his voice sharp. Maya pressed on. You told police the suspect ran out when you pressed the alarm. And you said he never made eye contact. How then, Mr. Brady? Did you identify him so clearly? Brady stammered. I got a good look before he left. But did the police show you a photo of Jamal Green and tell you he was the one? The courtroom was silent. Brady's mouth worked silently before he answered. I know what I saw. No, Maya said quietly. You know what you think you saw? Maya left it at that. During recess, Maya sat with Jamal on a wooden bench in the hallway. They already think I'm guilty, he said quietly. They don't decide that, she told him. But the truth was heavy. Judge Hargrove had set the tone. Every ruling he made was a roadblock. The jury was mostly white, mostly older. They watched Jamal like he was a problem to be solved. 10 minutes later, they returned to the courtroom. Maya called Jamal to the stand. He testified that he was home with his mother the night of the robbery. The next day, he was headed to work at the community center. He had no gun, no record. He was scared when the police stopped him because he had seen too many stories of what happened next. Morrow cross-examined him harshly, suggesting that if his mother was his alibi, why wasn't she there? Jamal's shoulders stiffened. Maya objected, but Hargrove overruled. Finally, Maya called Lisa Green, Jamal's mother. She testified with calm strength that Jamal had been home the entire night. When asked why she wasn't in court earlier, she explained that no one had told her she was needed. The prosecution declined to cross-examine her. Closing arguments came. Morrow clung to his narrative, but Maya knew the jury had seen the cracks. When it was her turn, she stood tall. You have been presented with 2 versions of this case, she told them. One based on assumptions and rushed judgment. The other based on truth. She looked at each juror. Jamal Green is not a criminal. He is a son, a brother, a young man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The jury deliberated for 30 minutes before returning a verdict. Not guilty. Jamal stared in shock. His mother wept as she hugged him tightly. Maya let herself exhale, relief flooding her. But then the courtroom doors slammed open. Law enforcement officers entered. A federal agent stepped forward. Judge Clayton Hargrove, he announced, you are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. Gasps echoed through the room. Hargrove spluttered as they cuffed him. You thought you were untouchable, the agent said. Turns out, you were just next. As they led Hargrove away, Maya turned to Jamal. He was watching in stunned silence. I didn't think justice worked like that, he said. Maya smiled, her legal pad tucked under her arm. Sometimes it takes a little longer. But today, she met his gaze. Today it worked just fine.